PH2.
Tonight on Talking Politics, in the first 3 weeks that mobile sports betting was live in this state, people wagered more than $500 million, and the state collected more than $9 million in taxes. So is that a good thing or cause for concern? We'll weigh the pros and cons ahead, but first...
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running for president. These days, the son of former U.S. Attorney General and Senator RFK Sr. and nephew of President JFK is as notorious for spreading anti-vax disinformation as he is famous for his family connections. In fact, at the height of the pandemic, RFK Jr. was identified as the second most prolific poster of anti-vaccine messaging on social media, part of the so-called disinformation dozen, responsible for nearly 3/4 of all vaccine hoaxes and lies online. His anti-vax status got a prominent mention in the headline or first sentence of nearly every major news report on his announcement, which in turn raises an obvious question. Just how much coverage does a candidate like RFK Jr. deserve? And what about other fringe and long-shot candidates? Joining me are Erin O'Brien, an associate professor of political science at UMass Boston, and the author and editor of MASSterList, Erin Tiernan. Thank you both for being here. Erin Tiernan, let me start with you because you're the one who sat through the, I believe, 2-hour kickoff speech that RFK Jr. gave the other day. What was the gist of his pitch, and who showed up to listen to him make it?
So in his nearly 2-hour-long meandering speech, he readily invoked his family name. He made a lot of references, used some pictures as props to remind people of exactly who he was here in a state like Massachusetts, which, of course, brought us JFK and his father RFK as well. So he is he's pitching himself as the person for the White House. He says the Kennedys need to be back in the White House, but he's not the typical Kennedy that you would imagine. And his supporters were not the typical people you would think would be backing a Kennedy. We saw a lot of his supporters invoking words like bodily autonomy in terms of vaccines, and as well as personal freedoms. And we also saw a lot of Republicans in the mix. More so than Democrats even.
And my recollection is that the people who you talked to, a lot of them were from out of state, right? They'd traveled here for the announcement, like RFK himself.
Exactly. I only found 2 people from Massachusetts in the couple of dozen that I spoke to.
Erin O'Brien, as I mentioned a minute ago, there's been plenty of coverage of this kickoff and a lot of context front-loaded. Here is what RFK Jr. is or what he's become over the years. Given all that, do you think that the amount of attention that we in the media have paid to him so far, including here in this program, does his candidacy deserve it?
No, we shouldn't be here.
We shouldn't be here? Okay, why not?
But more seriously, if his last name wasn't Kennedy, he wouldn't be covered. He is a fringe candidate. He's like a lot of friends and family we know have gone down rabbit holes on the internet and are factually inaccurate. His running for the presidency is hubris. It would be a joke if his last name wasn't Kennedy's, and that's the only reason it's getting coverage. But as Erin said, the fact that there weren't a lot of people from Massachusetts and there weren't a lot of Democrats at a Kennedy presidential announcement in Boston tells you everything you need to know.
I want to get back to this question of whether or not he deserves coverage with you, Erin O'Brien, in just a second. But first, Erin Tiernan, as you can both tell, I'm a little ambivalent about this because I'm not sure he deserves coverage, and yet here we are talking about him at some length. Erin Tiernan, when I saw the press release about RFK's announcement a few days before it happened, I'll confess that I thought, oh man, I really do not want to have to cover that. I hope I don't get that assignment for exactly the reasons that Erin O'Brien just mentioned. It's not just vaccines and COVID, it's vaccines causing autism, allegedly, his debunked claim that he's helped proliferate, 5G and the damaging power of 5G technology, which is another spurious claim he's put out there. Bill Gates, he has conspiracy theories involving Bill Gates. So I was relieved when I didn't have to cover this. For you and your colleagues at MASSterList, was it a no-brainer to go check it out, or did you wrestle with, is this something we want to give attention to, and if so, how do we want to frame it?
I think for us, we really wanted to get a sense of who the people were that were showing up and who the people were that would be supporting him. So that's kind of the goal that I had in mind when I went out to cover this event. And, you know, it was interesting to see kind of going back to the Democrats that we did see in the crowd. One was an 18-year-old kid. It will be his first time voting in a presidential election. And he is from a family. He says he's a lifelong Democrat. Of course, this will be his first ballot cast in that way. But he was saying that he was attracted to Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. because of what he's saying about bodily autonomy, personal freedoms. And he was pointing out what he saw as a hypocrisy on both sides of the Republic, you know, where the Republicans are trying to rail against abortion and all of that. He's seeing the same thing here on the Democrat side in terms of mandating vaccines during COVID. And he sees RFK Jr. as a candidate that's kind of striking the middle. So I found that pretty interesting.
Erin O'Brien, you said a minute ago when I asked if we should be talking about RFK, no, we shouldn't be here. I want to pull up the findings of a poll that USA Today did with Suffolk University and David Paleologos, which showed what struck me as surprising support for RFK Jr. among people who supported Joe Biden in 2020. 67% of them, according to this Suffolk and USA Today poll, are going to support Joe Biden again. 14% said they'd be inclined to support RFK Jr. for the Democratic nomination. 5 of them said that they'd be inclined to support Marianne Williamson, who we'll talk about more just towards the end of this segment. 13% of them were undecided. Don't those findings suggest that, you know, while Kennedy perhaps would have no following if his name weren't Kennedy, his name is Kennedy, and he seems to have a constituency that could affect the way the primary process plays out. Am I overreading that?
You know, I think so. Their methodology is sound, but it's a soft poll. What we know about polling is it picks up name recognition early on. And what that says is a lot of people don't want Joe Biden to run again, and then they heard the name Kennedy. Most mass publics don't know very much, if anything, about RFK right now. So I think if we run that poll again in 2 weeks and a month, once he's gained some salience via this program and others, and Democrats learn more about this RFK, not the Kennedy family, I guarantee those poll numbers will go way down.
I'm glad you mentioned that context. And I should add, and we have a quote from David Paleologos. He had much the same takeaway as you. I want to stress that. As he put it, in 2020, Joe Biden received more votes than any other president in U.S. history. Yet the polls tell us those same voters are open to other Democrats to wage a spirited primary. Kennedy, although a long shot at this point, starts in double digits and can't be ignored. I feel like I should note here the fact that for some supporters of President Trump, it's no secret that they see RFK Jr. as a useful stalking horse in the Democratic primary, as someone that they hope is going to damage President Biden as he presumably seeks re-election, even though he hasn't made it official. Roger Stone has suggested that Trump should tap RFK Jr. as his running mate. Steve Bannon, according to Robert Costa from CBS News, spent months trying to convince Kennedy to run. And recently, Tucker Carlson ran what struck me as basically a protracted infomercial for RFK Jr. We can take a look at a little bit of that.
We need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from this, you know, our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
I would think that what you just said, and I'll just be honest, I agree with most of it. But even if I didn't, I would think, boy, that's a really interesting thing to say. You have a coherent worldview. You've written a lot of books on these topics. You've clearly thought about it. You're not in it for the money. So don't these issues deserve a wide hearing before the public entering a presidential year?
I would think they would.
So it sounds like he'll be able to continue airing his stance on the issues, at least on Fox News and with Tucker Carlson. Erin Tiernan, have you thought at all about how you may cover his candidacy moving forward? Do you think this was a one-off for MASSterList, or do you think that you'll be dipping back in periodically to check on his campaign and how it's going?
I think if he wades back into Massachusetts, we'll definitely probably cover that. And in terms of covering some of the issues that he talks about, obviously all of the things that he's saying about vaccines and linking them to autism, that has all been widely debunked. So we would always cite that. Yeah. Anytime we're talking about an issue that has been debunked, that is misinformation, we would always be clear with our readers. about that.
And my recollection from your write-up, which was the first one I read, I think, about the Kennedy kickoff, I think you are among the many media outlets that did exactly that front-loading of context or emphasis of that context in your coverage. Erin O'Brien, we also, as I mentioned a minute ago, have Marianne Williamson running for president against Joe Biden. She, among other things, promised in 2020 that she was going to use the power of love to defeat Donald Trump. And she made for really entertaining viewing at the debates, even though she got essentially no votes at all. Do you have any counsel as an academic who studies this stuff and studies the way people actually vote? Do you have any counsel for me and Erin Tiernan and any other journalist who might be looking for it when it comes to whether and how we should cover fringe candidates in a big race like this one?
I'm glad I don't have your job on one side. We've fallen into the electability trap sometimes that, we are only going to cover candidates that are electable. And that becomes a bit tautological. They have to get attention to be electable. But a candidate like this that doesn't have any real support in the Democratic Party, and by this I mean RFK Jr., not Marianne Williamson, who did okay in the debates last time. But someone like that who doesn't have, isn't breaking through, but for it wasn't their last name. The electability standard, I think it's good to question, but when he's being used as a foil, you played, Tucker Carlson had him on the evening after he announced. MSNBC, CNN did not. I think that's telling. We have to use our minds and realize he's being used as a foil, whether he knows it or not. So why play into the partisan game? Your job's to cover, not to be an actor.
All right, Erin O'Brien and Erin Tiernan, thank you both for talking this through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, here in Massachusetts, it's been legal to bet on sporting events ever since the end of January. But legal online sports betting, which was widely expected to drive the new industry, only launched a month ago. Now, new data is giving us a sense of just how lucrative online sports betting is going to be for operators and for the state. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission says wagers totaling nearly $570 million were placed and settled in March, with all but $20 million of that traffic occurring online. All that betting made DraftKings, FanDuel, and the other companies licensed to operate in Massachusetts about $48 million, and then yielded more than $9 million in tax revenue for the state. For the record, back when sports betting was still being debated, supporters predicted the state would make maybe $60 million annually. But if that March traffic keeps up, and that's a big if, it could be a lot more. So is online sports betting's fast start good news? If you're a sportsbook operator, absolutely. But there are also concerns about gambling addiction and the way the new industry is promoting itself and advertising its products. Voiced, among others, by State Senator John Keenan. He joins me now, along with Victor Matheson, a professor at Holy Cross and an expert on sports economics and gambling. Thank you both for being here. Victor Matheson, let me start with you. There are a lot of caveats attached to those March numbers. There's the novelty factor. This became legal for the first time. March Madness was going on. There were a massive amount of ads. You couldn't escape the online sports betting ads, whether or not you were looking for them. And in addition, there were bonus bets included in those totals, which is, as some of our viewers will know, okay, if I put down $5, I'm given, say, $100 in free wagers to make, which may have inflated the numbers. With all that being said, when you saw those tallies for the first month of legal sports betting, legal online sports betting, what did you make of them?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. So the big months for betting is late in the year plus January. That's NFL plus Super Bowl, and March is our other big time. Strangely, people don't bet that much on Major League Baseball, so it's a little bit of a weak markets in general nationwide during those times. But overall, I don't think anyone would be surprised by these numbers. Again, I would say that we're gonna look at about $5 billion a year going forward. That is a surprisingly large amount, I think, to a lot of viewers, because that works out to about $1,000 of wagers made per adult in Massachusetts. And again, numbers of about $50 million in revenue, which I think might be surprisingly small to the typical viewer. So for every dollar wagered, Massachusetts only in the end is going to end up with about a penny or two in actual tax revenue out of every dollar wagered.
Okay, that's useful context, especially about betting habits, because when I saw these numbers, those of us in the media are sometimes guilty of jumping the gun and overreacting to things. And it sounds like I may have overreacted to the March numbers. Senator Keenan, what was your take on them?
They were, as I kind of expected they would be. I thought, honestly, they'd be a little bit higher given the amount of advertising that was done. You could not escape the advertising.
Yeah.
It's on barrels in downtown Boston. It's on billboards. It's on your phone. Everywhere you go,
You're
there's
right.
the
It's
advertising.
everywhere online and also everywhere physically.
Yes, you can't escape it. My ride in today, I was thinking, how many times before we started this interview did I see sports betting advertising? And it was continuous. So it's everywhere. So I suspect that they'll keep that pressure on in order to keep those numbers up.
That gets us to the legislation that you filed back in January that would limit the way the industry promotes itself and tries to pull in new customers. And we should stress that's a large part of what's going on here is they've got a huge base of potential customers and they're trying to get people in. Why did you file the legislation that you did, and what would it do exactly?
So I filed it because we've seen this before. We've seen what industries that market products that are addictive do in order to draw people to those products. We've seen it in the tobacco industry over the years. We saw it most recently in the vaping industry and how they were, through social media in particular, targeting people with their advertising, particularly young people. And so it's no surprise that it's happening here. And so in an effort to try to get out in front of it, which we tried to do during the process of legalizing it, but we're unsuccessful, we filed this legislation to at least tamp down some of the more egregious efforts. And that has to do with that you can bet and not win. No sweat bets, gimme bets, odds booster bets, things that make people think they can't lose.
Just so I'm clear on this, so would that be you bet $5 and we guarantee that we're going to give you however much, $20, $50, like we promise you we'll just give you the money?
It's the idea that you can bet and not necessarily lose because you're going to get credits in excess of what you betted. And that it's no sweat, it's no risk. Odds booster. So it further...
what's an odds booster? And there's this whole lingo here. Victor, I guess it's familiar to you. You also, Senator, but what is an odds booster?
If you bet, you might get a boost in the odds, more favorable odds for the bettor.
I see.
And so there's that. And then when you look at some of the advertising, there's some regulations in place that are not as stringent as what are in place for alcohol, which we know is addictive, for cannabis. And even if you're not sure where you stand on the debate about whether cannabis is addictive, let's say it's not. Their regulations on advertising are stricter than sports betting, which we know is highly addictive. And so we just didn't do what we were supposed to do, and this legislation would make it an unfair or deceptive act or practice by law to use certain terminology that's designed to make bettors believe that the risks are not as great as what they actually are.
Okay. Victor Matheson, the senator has his legislation pending. Andrea Campbell, the Attorney General of Massachusetts, has already pressured successfully the Mass Gaming Commission to tighten up some regulations on the new industry. She got the MDC to essentially say, we're going to keep them from marketing to people who are minors and also make sure that consumers have plenty of prominent opt-outs if they want to be released from the nonstop barrage of marketing that we've been talking about. To your mind, as someone who tracks this industry, are these details that should have been hammered out before the industry launched, or is it the sort of stuff that inevitably ends up getting worked out after the fact as people see how the industry operates?
Yeah, I don't think I'm wildly critical about the fact that it wasn't put in place in the first place, but it's crucially important, and I'm so happy that Senator Keenan is following up on this. It's crucially important to understand that you cannot count on the industry itself to regulate itself because it's for them, it's not about getting a lot of people to gamble. It's about getting people to gamble a lot. And they're going to be generating 90% of their revenues from 10% of their customers, which means, and those are exactly the sort of people you're like, wow, this person is gambling way too much, is what a normal person would say. But what of course an online betting site would say is, this is a premium customer. And so we cannot count on folks to regulate themselves out of exactly the sort of high gaming customer that is what makes them all their money. So it's very encouraging to see that the legislature is at least considering how you make sure that you don't have people becoming addicted here and engaging in massive amounts of gambling. Because remember, when I said $1,000 per person per year, that includes a ton of people who aren't going to touch gaming at all, which means that there are tons of people who we're talking $1,000 a month. We're talking about hundreds of dollars a week in bets. And I think by almost any definition, that's going to meet the definition of problem gambling.
Senator, I'm curious about your take on the question that I asked Victor Matheson. You said a moment ago that you had tried to get out ahead of some of this stuff when the legislation was working its way through the House and Senate, and it didn't happen. Do you, in hindsight, and I know hindsight's easy, but do you wish that these details had been hammered out before the law legalizing sports betting was passed?
I do, because with each day, more and more people are using the products. I think it was in the first 3 days, 400,000 new accounts were set up. And Victor may know better, but the rate of addiction is about, say, let's call it 1% even. That's 4,000 people who are going to struggle with addiction related to gambling. That's 4,000 families that are going to be impacted, 4,000 neighborhoods that are going to be impacted. And from a public health standpoint, those numbers are enormously large when you consider all the issues that we're confronting relative to behavioral health, substance use, and mental health. So adding 4,000 just out of that 400,000 is a very big number.
I don't want to get too inside baseball here, but to the extent that you're comfortable, did people push to take some of the extra steps that you're now asking the legislature to take? Was that pushed for in the process and people didn't want to hear it, or did it not occur to lawmakers that some of these things were going to be problematic?
I think it's probably a combination of both. We pushed during the Senate floor debate on the bill to include at least the same advertising restrictions that are in place for cannabis. Again, having been involved in tobacco and with opioids, I've seen these insider industry advertising practices, and it's inevitable that they get out of control. And so we tried to do that. This is another attempt, a different way to do it, and hopefully we'll have success here because we're facing a public health crisis related to gambling. There's no doubt in my mind.
Victor Matheson, what do you still want to know that we don't know yet about how the industry is operating in Massachusetts? We have the first month's wagering totals. We have a sense of how much the sports books are keeping. You just highlighted a bunch of basic trends involving the industry that people need to keep in mind moving forward, including the fact that most of the revenue generated comes from a small amount of participants. What else do you want to know about the situation in Massachusetts that we haven't learned?
I think, again, one of the important things that I would like to see is not just the total amount of gambling and the total amount of gambling and the number of accounts being made, but what sort of figures are we seeing from those biggest accounts? Because I think that's really where the issue is. I don't think the senator and I are upset at all if you have people making a $20 bet several times a year here, and quite honestly, even putting down a few bucks every week on your favorite sport is not something that would raise any red flags with me, and I presume Senator Keenan as well. Where the issues are is where we have, again, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars of bets being made. That's the place where, again, we're going to start meeting some of those, again, definitions of problem gaming. And that's the real concern. So, again, I'm not concerned necessarily about 400,000 accounts.
Yep.
I am concerned about 400,000 accounts if, like the senator says, 4,000 of them are showing, tens of thousands of dollars in bets just in that first month. That's a wild red flag.
When it comes to problem gambling, are there particular groups that are at risk when it comes to becoming addicted or getting out of control with this stuff? Subgroups that we should be keeping an eye on moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, so I can certainly answer that. The one thing that we thought is maybe they'd be similar to what we see for other types of gambling, casino gambling, horse racing, and lotteries, and they're totally different. We see a much higher proportion of men gambling than in other types of things, disproportionately male, disproportionately young, disproportionately highly educated. One of the insidious things about sports gambling is you have this illusion of control. Most people think when they're scratching off tickets, lottery tickets, they know deep down that you can't beat the lottery, and this is purely luck. But sports gambling gives you the illusion of control, gives you the idea that, if I was only just a little smarter and a little better, I could beat them. But what we know, you can't. And when we're estimating annual revenues for the gaming companies of $300 to $500 million in gaming revenues a year when this industry is mature. There is one place and one place only that $300 to $500 million comes from, and that's out of the pockets of losing bettors.
Senator Keenan, how much appetite do you think there is in the legislature right now to keep on honing this industry and making sure that it works as well as possible and is as, I guess, to prevent it from being as damaging as it might be if left unchecked? Do your colleagues want to keep tabs on this, or is there more of a mindset like, okay, this is a done deal, it's out here, there's the Mass Gaming Commission, they'll figure out what needs to be done?
I think that's generally how it works with most industries. Once the legislation's passed, the legislation then triggers regulations, and there's a bit of a handoff to the agency that's responsible for it, in this case, the Gaming Commission. So I think there is a little bit of hesitancy about going back and perhaps opening this up. But I think we really have to take a look at it legislatively because it's just spinning out of control. And even with what we did pass and what the regulations are presently, I believe that they're being somewhat flaunted by the industry. They're not supposed to be involved in recommending bets, yet they recommend parlays. They recommend through a kind of a network of advertising whether somebody's going to score so many 3 points. They're not supposed to be doing that, and yet it is occurring.
Wait, that strikes me as, and forgive my ignorance here, it shows that I guess I need to hop on and get an app, get an account so I can experience this bit. That's a huge thing for them to be doing that they're not supposed to, right?
That's my read on it. They are not supposed to basically suggest or lead somebody to placing a bet. The goal is supposed to be just to, join the industry, get involved in sports betting. And yet you see advertisings to basically, will Steph, Clay, and KD score 3 or more 3-pointers? Okay. And those bets will be boosted plus 160 to plus 225.
Well, all right, we'll have to have you back to keep on talking about this. Senator John Keenan, Victor Matheson at Holy Cross. Appreciate the conversation. Before we go, we want to say one last goodbye to our co-executive producer, Courtney Kennedy. She's leaving GBH, and it's a huge loss for us. It'd be impossible to overstate the impact she's had on the entire newsroom. She's a steady driving force behind Greater Boston. She's been that for more than 8 years. She's also a key reason this show exists at all. A fearless leader of many projects, debates, and specials. Courtney's a sharp editor, clever writer, and her organizational skills are unmatched. And I should mention, just on a personal level, she's one of my absolute favorite colleagues and has been for the past decade. We will miss you, Courtney, and we wish you luck. That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And please tell us what you think. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics, or you can find me on Twitter @ReillyAdam. For now, thank you for watching, and good night.
What would it take